I shall call thy message to reach all the corners of the earth.
Assalamu alaikum and Jazakallah for tuning in to this week's brand new episode of Roundup.
Each episode we work hard in bringing you interesting and educational reports from our studios from around the world. If you're enjoying this new season and have any feedback for us, please feel free to contact us at our social medias. We'll love to hear what you have to say. Nasir, should we kickstart the episode?
Yeah, of course. Let's go. Here are the headlines for this week.
A planned routine spacewalk by 2 Russian cosmonauts aboard the International Space Station was called off after flight controllers noticed a stream of particles spewing from a docked Soyuz spacecraft. The leak, thought to be coolant, was visible in NASA's live video feed and appeared as a torrent of snowflake-like particles spraying from the Soyuz MS-22 capsule. NASA said that none of the ISS crew were in any danger.
According to the U.S. Energy Department, scientists at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California for the first time briefly achieved a net energy gain in a fusion experiment using lasers. The scientists fused 2 light atoms into a denser one by focusing a laser on a target of fuel. Scientists say that this breakthrough could be useful in starting the process of a new source of clean energy and curbing climate change.
A military letter from King Henry VIII and a sheet of music written in Mozart's own hand at the age of 17 are being offered at an auction house Christie's Valuable Books and Manuscripts sale in London next week. The letter has an estimate of £25,000 to £35,000, while the sheet of music has an estimate of £80,000 to £120.
We hope you've been finding our weekly updates informative and useful.
Now, you may have heard news about the Uighar Muslims over the past year, but do you really know what's going on there? Well, lucky for you, Nasir has just the report.
One of the biggest accusations China faces nowadays is of genocide against the Uighur Muslims, especially in the northern western region of Xinjiang. Human rights groups have believed that China have detained more than 1 million Uighur Muslims against their will over the past few years over a large network of what the state calls re-education camps. So, who are these Muslims and why do they seem to be facing this kind of treatment? Let's find out. The Uighur Muslims are predominantly Muslims of Turkic ethnicity who live in northwestern China. With a population of around 12 million, Uighur Muslims speak their own language and see themselves as culturally and ethically close to Central Asian nations. Recent decades have seen a mass migration of Han Chinese, China's ethnic majority, into Xinjiang, allegedly orchestrated by the state to dilute the minority population there. Several countries, including the US, UK, Canada, and the Netherlands, have accused China of committing genocide against the Uyghurs. The declaration follows reports that China have been forcibly separating children from their families and attempting to break the cultural traditions of the group. A UN Human Rights Committee in 2018 said it had credible reports that China was holding up to 1 million people in counter-extremism centers in Xinjiang. People who have managed to escape have reported all forms of torture. China denies all allegations of human rights abuses in Xinjiang and claims them to be a smear campaign. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said Xinjiang enjoyed stability and prosperity and residents were living happy, fulfilled lives. No matter what each side says, the voices demanding justice are growing louder by the day. That is something that neither China nor the whole world can tune out. We should all pray for the safety and freedom of the Uighur Muslims. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah for that, Nasir. I definitely know way more than I did before.
Now we'll be heading over to Islamabad to hear this week's Friday Sermon Summary.
Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. During this week's Friday sermon, Huzur Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasr Aziz began his sermon by saying that many people question prayer and God, and there are many attacks being made, so people turned away from God, which is also leading people to doubt their faith and prayer. Huzur Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz said that in the sermon he would speak about prayer, its etiquette, our responsibility, and the need for prayer and belief in God in light of the writings of the promised Messiah ﷺ. During this week's sermon, Huzur mentioned that in the face of tests and difficulties, those who are weak of faith or the less knowledgeable think that either their faith is wrong and that there is no truth to it, or that God will not have mercy on them and take them out of their sufferings. They feel that God is cruel to them due to what they are going through. They feel that even having prayed, what they are going through is not improving. Huzur Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz said that such questions and doubts happen in the minds of those who are more interested towards the world, and that they should look at their own selves and standard of worship. During this week's sermon, Huzur Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz said, "He who does not forget God Almighty during times of ease is not forgotten by God Almighty during times of hardship. However, those who spend their time of ease and enjoyment and only go to pray in hardship, their prayers are not accepted. When the punishment of God comes, then the doors of the acceptance of prayers are closed." Dear brothers and sisters, we should therefore always remember God, even when we are happy and times are good, and not only pray when we are in trouble, as this is something which affects our prayers being answered. Beloved Huzur Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz said that for successful prayer, one should be patient and not think low of God. It is often seen that when a person is about to have his prayers answered, he gets tired and gives up. Because of this, they reject prayer and eventually stop believing in God. They claim that if God actually existed, then he would have surely accepted the many prayers they made. Such a person should think over their weak faith and patience, because that is the true cause of their failure. Dear brothers and sisters, this is another wonderful reminder for us on how we should never rush our prayers being answered and be patient whilst trusting God. Huzur said that the promised Messiah ﷺ stated that one must continue to pray for a long period, after which God Almighty shows himself to them. It has been seen that when a beggar remains patient at someone's door, does not give up in his begging and is emotional, he is able to convince even the most hardest person at heart. Therefore, should a person who prays not at least try as much as a beggar? God Almighty can never turn away a person who is persistently calling him. Huzur said that the promised Messiah ﷺ further states all pleasure and comfort comes after pain. It is for this reason that the Holy Quran states, "Aye, surely there is ease after hardship." Thus, if one does not find pleasure in prayer, they should check whether they have faced any hardship and pain for their prayers. One should be mindful of all the requirements of prayer and offer them on time. Furthermore, one should sacrifice their sleep for prayer. Dear brothers and sisters, we should always remember that any difficulty we go through for God, even if that means waking up early for Fajr, will help our prayers being answered when we truly need them. Huzur Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz stated that sometimes people do not put effort into their own prayers and think that their problems will be solved if they request others to pray for them. Huzur said a son asked for the promised Messiah ﷺ to pray for his father. In response, the promised Messiah ﷺ advised that he should pray very hard himself. If he prayed himself, only then would the prayers of the promised Messiah ﷺ be of any benefit to him. Dear brothers and sisters, this was just a very brief summary of last week's Friday sermon, which was filled with many interesting stories and incidents. We hope you are able to hear the full sermon, which can be found on mta.tv. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah for that.
Next up, we have a really interesting report on some riveting art sculptures in Australia. Let's take a look.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You may not realize it, but art is everywhere. It's on your phone cases, it's on postage stamps, and even in the flower arrangements in your garden. But have you ever wondered why? Why do we like to see things being beautiful? Wouldn't it be easier or even cheaper to just let our garden be overrun by the weeds? But to put it simply, why do we create art? To answer this very question, I have come to the Sculpture by the Sea at Bondi Beach in Sydney. One reason why we create art is to express what cannot be fully communicated through words. Let me give you an example. If I were to say that I feel quite lonely, I doubt you'd be able to fully experience what I am experiencing despite feeling sorry for me. But if you saw this sculpture called Long Division, perhaps you could feel that sense of longing for connection that stems from loneliness. Another reason why we create art is to prompt others to think. You might be asking, well, what do they want us to think about? To answer that question, let's take a look at another artwork, namely the sculpture of a giant hook that stands right behind me. When I was walking through it, it really felt as if I was going to get pulled right into the ocean. But let me ask you this. What do you think this sculpture means? Is it A, to represent the hook hand of a pirate, B, to have us think about the effects of overfishing, or C, to tell us to seize the opportunities that come our way? If you were to ask the sculptures themselves, the answer would be B, as the sculpture is literally named selfish. But what if I were to tell you that the answer could be all three? You see, art is not just a sculpture or a painting, but it is something we experience. And that experience can differ from person to person, from artist to viewer. So now you know a few reasons why we enjoy making and viewing art. So why don't you go down to your local art museum and experience it for yourselves?
That was a super informative report. Jazakallah.
Next, we have a report on my favorite subject, chocolate.
We are heading over to Ghana to find exactly how chocolate is made.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Zubdah Ahmed and I will be taking you to a very tasty place in Ghana. I've traveled in the early morning to a place called Suhum in the eastern region of Ghana. This is a chocolate factory and I will be showing you about the production of chocolate from the country that is one of the world's highest cocoa producers. But first, I had to find out where cocoa comes from. For that, I have to trek through the forest to the cocoa farm. On the way to the cocoa farm, through the forest, we saw an army of soldier ants. Ants have superhuman strength. They don't have lungs or ears, but they have 2 stomachs. Did you know Ghana is known for the yummiest chocolates in the whole world? Do you want to know how this cocoa pod has turned into this chocolate bar? Great, come with me. How long does it take to grow?
It takes 4 months to grow.
Okay. Is it ready to eat after 3 months?
No.
Most cocoa pods are harvested between the months of October and March.
Okay, so Zubdah, let's go to the factory to turn this into this yummy chocolates.
Wow.
Yeah, come, let me show you around.
Okay. Before I could enter the factory and learn how the cocoa pod turned into chocolate bars, I need to change into my safety gear. The factory was huge. When we entered, I was shown the first stage of chocolate making. After the cocoa pod is dried and crushed, it is made into a powder. The powder is heated at high temperatures, between 105 and 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, we entered the cooling section where the chocolate was hardened and molded into shape. The chocolate is then wrapped and packed. Then the exciting part. I got a chance to coat my very own chocolate droplets.
So here,
So delicious.
yeah, so delicious. So you here, we are going to do some dipping, chocolate dipping. Yeah, then you put it down. Put it down. Take another one. So we are done with the chocolate making.
Now we know all about chocolate. From cocoa pod to bar. I hope you enjoy the reports. Zubdah Ahmed from Ghana. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah. That's actually made me really hungry.
On that note, that brings us to the end of this episode. But don't worry, we'll be back here next week with a lot of super informative reports ready for you.
Until then, continue to send us your thoughts on our email at roundup@mta.tv or via our social media. Until next time,
Assalamu alaikum.
Oh, I shall call, oh, I shall call, I shall call, oh, I shall call, I shall call. Thy message to reach all the corners of the earth. Oh, I shall call, oh, I shall call, I shall call, oh, I shall call, I shall call. Thy message to reach all the corners of the earth.